For decades, we all thought we knew Simon Cowell. He was the brutally honest judge, the music mogul with the Midas touch, the man behind a global entertainment empire. His name meant power, ambition, and a work schedule that seemed almost inhuman. But behind the sharp suits and even sharper critiques, a quiet transformation was underway, sparked by three life-altering events. One was a miracle, the second was a near tragedy, and the third was the kind of challenge every parent dreads. He's saying goodbye, but not to his career. He's saying goodbye to the man he used to be. This is the story of how fatherhood, a brush with death, and a startling diagnosis forced Simon Cowell to confront his own mortality and completely redefine his life. To really get how much Simon Cowell has changed, you have to remember the man he used to be. Before 2014, Simon's life was all about work. His public persona wasn't an act, it was the real deal. A man driven by winning, who was behind global hits like The X Factor and the Got Talent franchise. His days didn't end at 5 o'clock, they stretched deep into the night, filled with calls, meetings, and an obsessive attention to detail that made him a fortune. This was a man who famously said, over and over, that being a dad just wasn't for him. In interviews, he was honest about it, admitting his lifestyle and personality weren't a good fit for kids. 20 years ago, I would have said I didn't think I was going to have kids because I thought I was too old, he once said, a line he repeated for years. His life was a blur of private jets, boardrooms, and TV studios. There was simply no room in that equation for the beautiful chaos of a child. Friends knew him as a notorious workaholic, completely obsessed with his career. It brought him incredible wealth and power, but he later confessed it was also making him miserable. He talked about reaching a point of deep unhappiness, a time when all the success he'd chased so hard started to feel empty. In a surprisingly revealing interview, he described this period as a dark time, where he felt like he was dying inside. He had built an empire, but he was its lonely king. That he was caught in a destructive cycle of working all night and sleeping all day, a habit he'd picked up to fill the void after losing his parents. He confessed that right before his son arrived, he'd hit rock bottom, thinking to himself, what have I got to live for? This was the Simon Cowell the world didn't see, a man at the peak of his profession, yet emotionally lost. The stage was set for something big to happen, something that would force him to tear down the very identity he'd spent a lifetime building. That something wasn't a new TV show, it was a tiny, unexpected heartbeat. On Valentine's Day 2014, everything changed. The birth of his son, Eric, named after Simon's own beloved late father, was a seismic shift that shook up every part of his life. The man who had built a career on being cool and emotionally detached was, by his own account, instantly and forever changed. In the years since, Cowell has spoken with shocking honesty about becoming a father. He admitted that everything he thought he knew about himself was wrong. After I lost my parents, I genuinely felt I would never feel that kind of love for anyone ever again. I thought that was it, until I saw the scan of him for the first time, he shared on the Kelly Clarkson show. That love, he said, was on another level. It was an emotion so deep he hadn't prepared for it, something that went beyond your love for your parents. He confessed, it almost hurts how much you love them. This wasn't just a private feeling, the change started showing up in public. The famously tough judge began to soften. Stories about kids on his competition shows, especially those facing challenges, started to visibly move him in a way they never had before. Fatherhood had cracked his armor, making him more empathetic. He saw it too, admitting that having a child had fundamentally changed his point of view, but even though his heart had changed, his habits hadn't, not completely. He was still the work-obsessed mogul, still pulling all-nighters, but his reasons were starting to shift. He began thinking about his legacy differently. It was no longer just about the next hit record. He started wondering, when he grows up, what's his dad going to have done? He even admitted that at first, he struggled to connect with a baby. When he was a baby, I'm like, "Well, why doesn't he like me?" And Lauren was going, "He's a baby, and I didn't understand that," he recalled. But then came the magic moment. At about 1.5 years, we started to communicate. That was magic. That connection cemented a bond that would become the new center of his world. Eric's birth was the beginning of the end for the old Simon. It was the moment he realized his life, once 99% work, had a new, more important job. He later said that his son had saved him from a downward spiral. If Eric hadn't come along, God knows what would have happened, he confessed. But while Eric's arrival planted the seeds of change, it would take a sudden, violent brush with death to make them fully grow. In August 2020, Simon's world came to a literal, crashing halt. While testing a new electric bike at his Malibu home, he fell hard and broke his back. The injury was incredibly serious, requiring a 6-hour surgery to fuse his spine with a metal rod. For a man who lived his life in control, he was suddenly, terrifyingly, helpless, lying in a hospital bed. The first thing he thought about wasn't his business or his TV shows. It was his son, Eric. The fear of what could have happened, of being paralyzed, or worse, of leaving his son without a dad, was more terrifying than any physical pain. He later said he was frighteningly close to needing a wheelchair for life, a thought that gave him a completely different outlook on life. The accident was, in his own words, a wake-up call. He'd started cycling to get healthier, but he admitted he had no idea how unfit he really was until he was forced into rehab. The recovery was brutal and humbling. It stripped away the larger-than-life persona, leaving just a man forced to confront his own physical limits. This experience locked in the emotional changes that had started with Eric's birth. The vague idea of being a more present father became an urgent, non-negotiable mission. He later made the shocking statement that breaking his back was one of the best things that ever happened to me. He explained, "It hurt, trust me, when it happened, but good things happened off the back of it. I didn't know really how unfit I was until I had to start doing all the exercises. But I feel better today than I did 3 years ago when it happened." The accident wasn't just physical, it was mental. It forced him to stop, to be still, and to rethink everything. The relentless pace he had kept up for decades was no longer an option, nor was it something he even wanted anymore. He'd been given a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. He realized his health and his family were not guaranteed. That stark realization finally pushed him to ditch the workaholic lifestyle for good. After the accident, Simon didn't just go back to his old life. He started tearing it down to build something new, with his family at the center. This was the real start of his emotional goodbye to the man he used to be. The biggest change was his legendary work schedule. The man who lived for all-nighters made a conscious choice to take back his time. "I had to make a decision, which was, do I go back to what I was doing before? Or do I do a little bit less and I'm able to spend more time with him? That's what I decided to do," he explained, and he meant it. He created strict new rules for himself. Fridays became a no-work zone, and his workday, which once bled into the next morning, now had a hard stop. Eat dinner at 5 o'clock. Don't take calls after 5:30. Don't read emails after 5:30, he listed as his new rules. This wasn't just about working less, it was about being present. He talked about how important it was to be fully focused when he was with Eric, because kids know when you're faking it. He started stepping back from some on-camera roles to focus on producing. He even gave up his lead judging spot on his show Walk the Line, explaining it was time to work more behind the scenes. Friends confirmed it was a deliberate choice to spend more time with his fiancée, Lauren Silverman, and Eric. His lifestyle changed dramatically in other ways too. He became a huge fan of therapy, admitting that he'd taken care of his body but had ignored his mind. He finally quit smoking, a promise he kept thanks to Eric's constant reminders. "He is really strict," Simon shared. "If he catches me, it's like being back in school. He even had his facial fillers removed after his son was upset by a picture of him, realizing enough was enough. The family moved from the hustle of London to a quieter life in the countryside, giving Eric a childhood of climbing trees and playing outdoors. Simon was finally finding balance, something he called absolutely key. But just as he was settling into this new, healthier rhythm, his family would face a new kind of test. Just as Simon had redefined his life around health and family, he and his partner Lauren were confronted with a challenge that would demand more of them than ever before. For some time, their son Eric's health became a subject of quiet concern, leading to a journey of medical consultations and tests. The family navigated this period with privacy, but eventually, they received a diagnosis that would reshape their world once more. According to reports, Eric was diagnosed with autism. Cowell himself described the diagnosis as a shock, a feeling any parent in that position would understand. The news created a new reality for the family, one that required not just a different schedule, but a deeper level of patience and understanding. The couple immediately focused on one goal: giving their son the best possible life. For the Cowell family, this meant diving into a world of learning and adapting. They embraced early intervention, with Eric reportedly beginning speech and occupational therapy to help him navigate his challenges. This journey was never about curing a condition, but about giving Eric the tools, support, and unwavering love he needed to be himself. This challenge solidified the transformation that had been years in the making. If the bike accident was a wake-up call about his own life, Eric's diagnosis was a call to a higher purpose as a father. His focus became sharper than ever. His life was no longer about his own needs or even his new schedule. It was about Eric's needs. The family's commitment was absolute, with both Simon and Lauren becoming deeply involved in Eric's support system, underscoring the importance of early diagnosis and intervention. Publicly, Simon continued to evolve. By speaking openly about his son's journey, he has helped raise awareness and reduce the stigma often associated with autism. This emotional vulnerability, once so alien to his public image, became his new signature. He has shared that despite any challenges, Eric is a happy and loving child who brings so much joy to his life. The emotional goodbye had reached its most meaningful stage. He had left the self-centered mogul behind. He was now, first and foremost, a father dedicated not just to providing for his son, but to understanding, supporting, and celebrating him for exactly who he is. Before we continue with how Simon is using his platform to help others, if you're finding this story of transformation as powerful as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that shape the icons we think we know. The news of Eric Cowell's diagnosis, along with the very visible changes in Simon himself, caused a major shift in how the public saw him. The story around the music mogul started to change. The man once known as Mr. Nasty was now being seen through a new lens, that of a dedicated, loving father. When the family's journey with Eric's health became public, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Fans sent messages of encouragement, and the public, which had been entertained by his harsh judgments for so long, was now moved by his devotion as a dad. The media coverage also took on a more compassionate tone. Many reports used the Cowell family's story to spark wider conversations about the importance of early diagnosis and intervention for autism. The narrative became a platform to discuss the resources and support needed for all families navigating a similar path. This public conversation humanized Simon Cowell in a way no one expected. His story resonated with millions. First, it was about the transformative power of fatherhood. Second, his brush with death sparked conversations about work-life balance and what really matters. His decision to step back from a relentless work culture to put his family first was seen as both brave and inspiring. And finally, his openness about Eric's journey helped demystify autism for a global audience. By sharing their story, the Cowells contributed to a broader cultural understanding of neurodiversity, sending a message of love, acceptance, and the importance of celebrating every child's unique gifts. The public was no longer just watching a judge on a talent show, they were witnessing a man on a profound personal journey, and they were rooting for him. The emotional goodbye in Simon Cowell's story was never about leaving his career. It was a much deeper departure. It was a goodbye to a version of himself he no longer wanted to be. He said goodbye to the 18-hour workdays and the belief that success was only measured in ratings and record sales. He traded late-night emails for evening story times and boardroom fights for walks in the countryside with his son. He discovered that working less didn't make his life smaller, it made it richer in ways he'd never imagined. He said goodbye to the emotional armor he'd worn for decades. The man who used to cringe at sentimentality was now speaking freely about his love for his son and his own past struggles. This honesty wasn't weakness, it was a sign of his new strength. He was no longer just a judge of talent, he was proof of the power of personal growth. Most importantly, he said goodbye to fear. Faced with his own mortality after his accident, and then with the lifelong journey of supporting his son, he chose to move forward with love. His platform, once used to critique singers, was now being used to champion causes for children's health and to raise awareness for families like his own. His legacy now has two parts. There's the professional one, the pop culture hits and the careers he launched. But now there's a second, more powerful legacy. It's the legacy of a father who was willing to change everything for his son. It's the story of a man who learned that real success isn't about being on top of the world, but about being the center of your child's world. This goodbye wasn't an end. It was the beginning of his most important chapter yet. Simon Cowell's journey over the last decade is a powerful story of change. It shows how life's most unexpected turns can lead us to our most important truths. He started as a man who built an empire on ambition, a man who was sure fatherhood wasn't for him. But life had other plans. First came Eric, a son who cracked open his tough exterior and introduced him to a love he never thought possible. Then came a broken back, a wake-up call that forced him to realize life is fragile and he needed to be there for his family. And finally, his son's autism diagnosis, a challenge that didn't break him, but instead cemented his new purpose as a father and an advocate. The Simon Cowell of today is a man remade. His emotional goodbye wasn't to his fame or fortune, but to the hollow chase for success. He said farewell to the workaholic who was dying inside, and embraced a life defined by balance, presence, and a deep, powerful love for his family. His story is a compelling reminder that it's never too late to change, to redefine what success means, and to discover what truly matters. It shows that our greatest legacy isn't what we build for the world, but the love we give to the people who are our world.